All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And so today's presentations, start with Evan Haas with Curvature, and then Steve Zeiler. I don't know if you have a name for your product yet, but looking forward to seeing both of those. And then we do a little housekeeping and then have the Q&A. And just note that I'm recording this, including the Q&A. And with that, I'll hand it off to you. Stop sharing this. Check it out. Set up on there? Okay.
Is my connected to the Zoom or?
There's a mic up there.
Doing a little bit double laptop here for notes. Yeah, so I'm Evan Haas. Thanks for the introduction. Very excited to talk to everybody. And, we're going to share the story of Curvature, which has actually been basically a 3-year journey.
I just joined.
Which has basically been a 3-year journey to go from an implanted spinal device to a wearable device and then to a video system. So we're at pivot 3, a lot of learning along the way, and I'm hoping to be able to share that to help everybody else along their wearable journey as well. So really the first place that I like to start with this, and also objectively, the slides get better over time. Don't worry. This is through many years, 3 years of slide building and storytelling. So hopefully that you'll see a little bit of a transition here. But really, the first thing I like to start with is the problem. Even though we've pivoted the technology 3 times, the problem has always been the same. I think the old adage, fall in love with the problem and not the solution, is incredibly important and a big part of our story. And our team, I went to the CBIT master's program out of undergrad. I did my undergrad at University of Kansas. I worked on some spinal technology in University of Kansas, but I also had 2 startups in my undergrad, both of which failed for very different reasons. And I learned a lot from it. And I decided whenever I was going to go to grad school, I was going to start a company and figure this out. And so the reason we pivoted and stuck with this problem for so long was because there is an end goal, there was a mission to have happen, and we needed to find a way to get this product into the patient's hands. And so the big problem that we were addressing is spinal surgeries are incredibly hard to predict. They have very low outcomes if the patient is incorrectly treated. And the stories that I saw in part of the CBIT program, we spend over 3 months watching spine surgeries, orthopedic surgeries. I watched surgeries here at Hopkins, Bayview, New Jersey, and in India, all spine surgeries, and consistently saw these problems where patients had outcomes that were not predicted. And so this story just continued to captivate us and really motivate us, where patients would go in and get an initial index surgery, and then they would continue to fail. So actually what you're seeing here is an initial spine surgery, a fusion surgery, but the patient continued to kyphose. They failed over the top of their surgery due to incorrect balance, biomechanics, a whole host of reasons for why this happened. And so this patient had to go in and get a second spine surgery. All of these, 6 months, terrible recovery and really bad outcomes. And the issue is we just can't today predict these outcomes and better plan these surgeries. And so this patient is not uncommon, but she failed for a 3rd time and had to have a completely immobilized and fused spine. And so this mission, this problem is really what our driving force to go after this was. And so we learned all about the biomechanics, all about the systems, the fusions, all the surgeries, and tried to figure out and go after this in a really novel manner. And we ended up doing a ton of iteration, design journey, followed the whole biodesign process. If you look at Stanford Biodesign, they teach a version of it here with a spiral model with Dr. Ashari and Dr. Yazdi, incredible teachers on this concept, generated over 1,000 different solution concepts to figure out what we wanted to do, and then ended up going after this really novel implant system that we developed. I'm not showing the whole thing here. It's really cooler, but just in case I want to go after this in the future to preserve any IP on this, these are some of the implants that we actually build that are not as novel, but figured out how to wire EDM, manufacture these, do all of these, and create titanium prototypes for our actual implants so we could do studies around this. Fun as a mechanical engineer, if you want to talk about that kind of stuff, I'm all about it, even outside of the wearable tech. But really what we found was we went through the whole market pathway to figure out, IP, FDA, reimbursement, and the business model on this. And really what we found going to the end of this was there is probably a need here, but what we found is that clinical trial for the outcomes of this patient care is going to be over a 2-year clinical trial. It was going to be $50 million or more to be able to do this, prove it. It was going to be de novo I don't think this is probably not true. I don't think we could have got a 510K out of this in the final iteration. And we're kind of stuck. We're like, this is a great idea. This is a huge need, but where do we go from here? And so decided to, pivot. And luckily enough, the ABLE Foundation was able to sponsor a fellowship through the Center for Bioengineering, Innovation, and Design, and we're able to kind of start anew with a fresh lens at this and started looking at this problem from upstream. There are some really good papers showing that if you can choose the right patients, choose the right screw trajectories, the right implant, and improve the biomechanics of the surgery itself, you had a less likelihood of failure over time. And so we went after this, same problem, but really trying to prevent and better select these surgeries. But how can we improve the patient pathway, verify surgical candidacies, and then build dynamic models for how do we better choose implants for this? And so we devised this whole solution of a 48-hour continuous monitor that's able to measure the biomechanics, the fatigue of the muscles, looking at muscle innervation, looking at gait, posture, a whole course of things. And we didn't start with the wearable device because we kind of learned our lesson that first time. We said, now, how are we going to do this in the prototype iterative fashion? And so we developed 7 pages, or actually hundreds of pages of reports to show doctors and ask them, if I gave you this data, could you plan a better surgery? How would this influence your surgery? And we reduced these 100 pages down to 7 metrics and 7 pages of metrics that we knew that doctors have said would change the way that they're doing surgeries, what patients we would do this on. And so from there, we had designed a system around this, and we ended up designing this pretty terrific wearable device system to be able to achieve those end goals. And so we went, the team really worked hard on this. We had 7 custom PCBs printed, designed, manufactured ourselves to make our own wearable devices because none of the wearable devices on the market met our specifications for what we needed. So we learned how to manufacture, how to produce these things and create this system, and really where this was going to fit, and then build the packaging and everything around this to fit the rest of the business model with it. The workflow, we were calling ourselves the Holter monitor of spine. How can we continuously monitor and evaluate the function biomechanics of a patient in the morning, in the night, over time, after they get tired, to better be able to determine the dynamics of the spine for surgical correction? And so the way we're going to work, similar to Holter monitors, prescribed by the clinic, patient wears it for 48 hours or more, and then they mail it back to us so we can reuse the sensors, because the sensors we're developing were very expensive, and then being able to create some great insights around this. This led to some very, very specific, difficult engineering challenges that I'm very proud of the way that we went through this. How do we resolve some of the adhesive issues, working on a bunch of 3M, getting them to send us a whole bunch of test packs so we could determine what adhesive works best with our system. How do we reduce in the mobility areas of the spine? And we're able to get a pretty slick system going with this, at least enough to be able to study. And so this is the system that we devised. Can stay with the patient, shower, wear with it, sleep with it as minimal as possible. And we're able to get some incredible models of motion, not only just spine, but also pelvic and how the legs are moving in response to this, and then built this whole system around it. But a big problem that we had that we started to solve with this was actually in testing, because of the way that we over-constrained our solution set, where this is going home with the patient. We have to have them, if it falls off, be able to put it back on. There's a whole bunch of contingencies that we had to worry about that are very readily known in wearable devices. And one of the biggest issues that we saw, I don't know if hopefully the camera at least is on me a little bit, where if you put these devices in your experienced clinician, and you can palpate and determine the direction of the spine and how you're doing. You know where C7 is, you know where the, ASIS, PSIS, where these points on the body are, great. But if you don't, and you end up aligning these wearable devices 10 degrees off or 5 degrees off even, then our model thinks that you are bent like this your whole life and your whole time, which is not true, going to lead to incredible inaccuracies as we continue to develop these posture models. And sure, there are some tests and calibration mechanisms that existed, but it wasn't viable. And one of my early startups that I did in undergrad was a computer vision based system. And I was like, hey, I think we can actually solve this and really have a breakthrough with wearable devices if we allow people to take simultaneous video and wearable device, because then we can create a transfer function that realigns and calibrates the entire system together to get incredibly accurate, robust models of pose throughout the 48-hour monitor, including if it falls off, we can recalibrate and correct the system. So we actually did a whole patent on this, a whole big thing validating and showing all of this technology for the wearable device, still a pretty incredible system. And so we're able to, with computer vision, take videos of patients, and you can see the flashing sensors on there to be able to do this transfer function, essentially solve for extra adipose tissue for patients who might have a high BMI. How are they moving? Because your bones don't follow your skin, which leads to a whole different topic that I could go on for a long time on. But we developed this really awesome system. And so it required us to not only build the wearable device, but also this computer vision system that we had to become very adept at to be able to deploy this and fit into the original model that we selected, which was, how do we deploy this at home? Doctors don't want to spend more than 5 minutes putting this up. And so a very, very, very tough solution set. But we were able to get pretty close with it. And we ended up doing a 25-patient study here at Hopkins with a system, with an incredible motion capture system to be able to track and prove out our theories for what we're looking at. And this was an incredible study and really led to great learning. But honestly, and then did all the other analysis, FDA regulatory, see the slides changed over time. Hopefully that's better than the first one. But really what we found is basically kind of by the end of this study, we were a bit broken, battered. This was brutal. Patient recruitment was tough. Like the problems that we had, we were 14 months behind schedule because of IRB issues. We were taking video of patients. You don't believe that? So we continued to amend the study over time and add video and all of this other stuff. And so we got incredibly behind on this. And then we're running out of funding for this. We had a whole lot of issues with data transfer, uncertainty of being able to take data out into a company, into the future, and compute access. In addition, all of the videos that we were running was an incredibly dense model, and it required GPUs and about 20 minutes of compute to be able to do this. And so how do we do this on any computer that is and that's on a good GPU? When you do it and you're limited by HIPAA compliant and owned by the university, further reduce your scope to be able to run these models. And so really, and additionally with the wearable device itself, we were an order of magnitude too high on power consumption, or it's to be at the sampling rates that we needed to be at, and we needed to reduce the form factor significantly. So a ton of barriers at this point, this late in the game, to figure out, all right, we've got limited funding left, we need to make this happen. But really the winning points for this were computer vision was looking good. We started showing this to clinicians and they loved it. And we had a great development team to do the development for computer vision and all of this data security stuff. And patients were into it. They've said, this is the coolest thing that I've done all year. They loved this stuff and had a great buy-in. And so really we had to look at the team where we were and say, how do we go forward with this? And so luckily ended up taking a trip out to California and visiting with one of our collaborators out in California. And the doctor, he said, Evan, I love this wearable device. It rocks. In a year and a half, when you get it through FDA, bring it to me. I'll put it on 20% of my patients. And I'm like, heck yeah, okay, that rocks. But he's like, hey, Evan, but this was interesting. What was the video you shot? Why did you do that? And so I started going into the weeds, showing the calibration system, which was essentially a bug that we originally developed to be able to calibrate the system. And he's like, holy crap, Evan, like, what are you doing? You over-engineered the crap out of this. Give this to me now. I'll do it on every single one of my patients that walk through the door. If I can shoot a video of them and track them over time, that's a game changer. This wearable is cool. It's great for deformity patients, very specific patients, but man, this is really where you need to be focusing. And we're like, all right. And then luckily we're able to get the Presidential Venture Fellowship to continue on with the company, continue to build this new system, and really with a very focused goal. And bringing up Dr. Robick and Jen Stern, Dr. Sternum on their paper that they talked about last time was there is a huge barrier to translating these computer vision technologies with how do you deploy them, how do you allow data collection. And really, our team was incredibly poised to be able to take on these challenges due to the development work that we did with the wearable device and all of the testing that we did. And so we kind of created this company around the concept of what I didn't know at the time. I actually never saw this paper until, I guess, a year ago. But we were tackling the biggest problems that they were calling out in this of this technology is not user-friendly. It requires CS people to be able to set up, deploy, choose your model, fine-tune it, train it. You need incredible experienced AI engineers on that. You also need experienced biomechanics and robotics to be able to take 2D video into 3D translation. To be able to do all of that requires an incredible knowledge set. Then you also have to be able to secure that, make databases, and make this continually accessible and easy to utilize for the end user. And then in addition to this, you've got being able to get this off the ground of the company needs to be able to provide a number of off-the-shelf algorithms that can be easily deployed and chose for early validation feasibility studies. So we need to have a library, a catalog of validated shown algorithms that we can deploy and allow researchers and clinicians to utilize this technology. And then we also, as a company, need to be able to validate and build these models ourselves. So we built our own motion capture space, just finished it up in Towson, Maryland, where we can take all of these and build new models and continue to iterate on these and get fine-tuned data so that we can continue to get more clinically accurate. And then we built this all in such a way that we can collect this from a phone to address the limited hardware infrastructure. And then one of the biggest boons is, GPU compute is not cheap. I was talking to a company the other day, and a 30-second video cost $80 for them to process because they were doing so much optimization and so much compute. And so once you start throwing a massive amount of data into the cloud, your AWS bills get stupid large. It is crazy. And so you have this huge barrier to understand how do we cluster compute, how do we descale this, and how do we secure this in the cloud. And it is something that honestly, any researcher is going to have a very difficult time to figure out. You really need a company structure to be able to solve some of these huge problems. And then additionally, the extra layer of complexity that comes is how do we make this error-free? How do we test this and build a whole software development process that we can turn out the best, most reliable error-free code? In addition to, I jokingly say infallible UI because we did 25 UI studies, UI UX studies over Thanksgiving with our families. The whole team took the device home and did testing with it. It's not infallible now, but I think that the expertise and the learnings that we've gotten over time make us even better to correct and detect these errors with this system to make it hopefully one day infallible. And then being able to create custom models. And really, this last step here is that kind of the company mission, right? If we create a scalable platform or company that enables and supports our partners for data collection, validation, and then the final step of this deploying clinically validated models through FDA, and we partner and choose the best researchers, clinicians that are empowered to help their patients, then we're going to do some amazing things. And so with this mission, this whole thesis in mind, we went out and, I'll jump because I'm running on time here, but we built this system. So this is Curvature 3.0 from the implant to the wearable device, now to this platform to enable the deployment of these systems. And so working with everybody, did I-Core regional and national talks to, I guess we're probably in 300 stakeholders probably right now. And what we found is people hate apps. And so they don't want to download them. They don't want to use them. And also as a designer and engineer, I also hate apps. I hate it when I go into a parking structure and they make me download a freaking app to park. Get out of here. That's crazy. Same feeling with all of the patients that we talk to. So I do like an engineering challenge. So how do we do this even harder? How do we build this on web so it can work on any device, any system? And then how do we make it so a patient doesn't have to remember a login? And we build this system via text and we're able to secure it all. And so a patient's able to simply take a text, to click on the link, no download required. And then we follow through with all of our systems and error checking along the way to walk them through how to do assessments. This is all on web. And we're able to deploy this in such a way that they never have to do any of the compute themselves. The phone is doing some of the initial processing, and then we do the rest of the hard lifting on the cloud with AWS. We process this, and then proving out our initial models are around gait and gait assessment. And so are we able to do this in a lab? This is boring. This is a lab space. Great. Actually, we'll jump to this one. But what more interesting, can we do this in the home environment in the natural settings? And so on this, you see me, terrible backlighting. A third of the screen is taken up by my wine rack. We've got the door blocking part of my body when we walk through. Terrible settings. These are the kind of videos when you do UI testing that you get back. They're awful. And so how can we make this robust enough to be able to deploy this in such an environment in clinical and beyond is really the core competencies. And so this is a fun video to just show the initial assessment. So very small walking pattern. You can see the floor space. These are just spatial temporal metrics for gait. But you see the really small stride lengths. And then over time, as I come back, I'm taking much bigger steps. And then the stride times are kind of
is that rug an actual QR code, or is that part of your house? Do you actually have a rug that's a QR code?
What? No.
Is that used for the app?
Oh, so
Yeah, really, what did you
just so okay. So
the product?
yeah, the caveat to this is right now there is a tremendous future, and I think we can get to a place where we don't need this. But we found from our development that we do need, and we can get better accuracy, and there's less user intervention if we use what we're calling a floor marker here. And so we've developed a floor marker, that we're able to manufacture for $1.90 a floor marker and be able to get these at high production. And so you can see all the instruction booklets and the UI and stuff that we've gone through to be able to develop this. But essentially, all you need right now is just to plot data on the ground. And if that's in the frame, in the scene, we get accurate metrics. And so depending on the system, obviously, gaits is different from range of motion, posture, any of these other things. You might not need it depending on it is. But part of our catalog is, all right, we've got this assessment type, and then hoping to be able to bring in Dr. Aerobics code to be able to have another assessment to be able to deploy into the platform as well with different UI and instructions all along the way. And all of this SOC 2, HIPAA compliant. And then another piece is that we learn talking to neurosurgeons, talking to orthopedic surgeons. Orthopedic surgeons are like, I need to know bone density scores. I need to know DEXA. I need to know all of this completely different things that they're looking at collecting and measuring from this, or in comparison in their studies that they want to run from the neurosurgeons. We said this is going to be such a boon to us to be able to have to custom code everything. And so instead we built, if you've ever used Google Forms, on our site, you can fully customize your own research study, the data that you want to collect, the studies, the workflow, everything is completely customizable so that we can deploy this out to any clinician that wants to do these kind of studies. Also was a challenge to be able to deploy it. And then in addition, because I spent way too many nights as a researcher here at Hopkins going through written papers of PROMs that we had of people going through the study, that's awful. We should fix that. Come on, it's 21st century. We've had the ability to do OCR and recognition via computer vision for a long time. We should be scanning into the same platform. So we've got subjective PROMs and objective measures of function via computer vision, all on the same platform. Needs to be together, needs to be secure. That was a duplicate. And then additionally, another advancement that we're working on is how do we share compute? So this data that originally as a researcher, it's going to be noisy. You're going to have to do some fine tuning. You're going to have to do some manual editing. So how can we enable that? We were told, at Hopkins with our research study, just you have to be obviously very careful with all this data. So it has to be on secured networks, which made, the research team a little bit sad going home for breaks, not being able to continue to work on this data. So how can we continue to have this data housed in the Curvature secure system and allow them to be able to access it from their own laptops and be able to do all the editing analysis? And then they don't have to have a crazy computer that has a GPU. We can share GPUs and allow them to do continuous compute with this. But all that's to say, we've got some really cool stuff coming with a bunch of different applications. Again, Dr. Romick's Labs Code talking about all of the amazing potential applications along the way through the whole entire life cycle of this system. And then, an update from where I started is we're launching our pilots with surgeons this next year for spine surgery. And I couldn't be prouder to be able to get to that point. Been a long journey and a lot of learning, and I couldn't do this without our just amazing team. Not everybody is listed here, but really we've got an amazing team that allowed us to get to this point. And I'm very proud and happy to be able to share this with everybody. And, hopefully our learnings through this journey and these thoughts will help you choose more wisely than we did on how we're deploying these studies. If you're looking at building your own wearable device, I've got thoughts on that. Let's talk. We went through 7 iterations for a reason. And so I'm happy to be a resource to anybody in this community as they choose how they want to deploy their system and be wiser than we were in our selection. So thank you. And also obviously looking for clinicians in the future to pilot and partner with. So yeah.
I'm happy to go some other week if we want to just continue this discussion. I mean, it's up to you guys. I don't have to talk.
Okay.
You should.
I
Some really good talks to have together though, I think.
Okay.
Why don't you still go ahead and we can do a follow-up, because I think there's, everyone try to hold the Q&A to the end for both of them, and I've got my question. Stop sharing this.
I'm Steve. Nice to see everybody. We'll speed through a couple of these things because the whole point here is to give you guys, how do I advance? There you go. There we go. All right. Because the whole point here is to give you guys an overview of what's happening. So if you guys want to be involved, you can, right? So we're going to start simple and go forward. I get some money from these people here. I'm a stroke physician. Some of you know that. I see patients all the way from the emergency department where we reperfuse brain all the way through their admission to the time that they go home. There are a lot of people that are interested in building monitoring for the acute situation. That's not us. Okay, there is a group at Johns Hopkins that is working on this. How can we figure out if somebody's having a stroke? A lot of people forget that this is where the majority of patients live. And so we are actually developing systems that look at patients once they've progressed through here and they need to figure out how to do 2 things: how to prevent a stroke and how to get better from the stroke that they've had. Okay. And I remind people, I think a lot of people forget this, stroke actually leads the way in this, right? So 15 years ago were the first major wearable devices that changed clinical care in a huge way. The idea being, if we can increase monitoring, we can increase our diagnostic yield and therefore prevent a disease that's killing our patients, atrial fibrillation. We identify it, we treat it, and we prevent stroke. And these were the devices with the flip phones. I remember prescribing these even back in as a resident, right? And patients freaking hated it because they fall off, they don't work, they don't transmit the data. And now we have things that work a lot better. I have nothing to do with any of this. I show this as an example because I'm proud of my field. We have a huge number of people, and I'm going to mention work that I have had no hand in doing. I just happen to be a part of the team that's working on it. Ali Tehrani, we need to get him to come to this actually.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'll make sure he comes. And Ryan, who apparently you're like the king of all of this, so I'm just going to keep saying Ryan's name. And then,
He's the Don Corleone chair.
That's right.
The Frito Corleone,
Godfather.
the Frito Corleone chair.
I'm gonna mention a couple of people from IBM and Antares, okay? If you guys haven't read this article, go back and read it. It's fun to read it. This came December 3rd, 2020, right? So we've lived through about 9 months of the pandemic, and you see our stethoscope turning into a T1 line, and what the economists thought was going to happen with digital medicine. They got some things right, they got some things wrong. I'm gonna pivot from that and talk about what our goals were and where our goals are heading. And again, this is a 10,000 foot overview. We're not gonna do a deep dive into the data here. Anytime we talk about this, and anytime I bring this up with my team, I always talk about these 3 spheres. It has to be clinically useful. The technology has to accomplish something that is not accomplished without technology. If you can accomplish it without technology, why use technology? And it can't interfere with the patient experience, right? If the patient hates it, it's not gonna work. Hence the flip phones with the monitors. It has to be something that the patient is gonna use. So we started easy, and in the midst of the pandemic, we actually learned some ways on how to better address secondary stroke prevention, mainly how do we monitor risk factors, how do we monitor blood pressure and so forth. I partnered with Harman. If anybody ever bought a Dell computer in the mid-1990s, you got those giant beige rectangle speakers, you know what I'm talking about? That's Harman Kardon. That's this company. They're now a subsidiary of Samsung. They're not making speakers anymore. They're making smart healthcare tech. And in this study, we made a box. It was a Hopkins Harman branded box that every patient leaving the inpatient stroke unit received. They were going home. If they were going to rehab, they didn't get it, only if they were going home. In that box was a watch, monitored steps and heart rate, a blood pressure cuff, and a tablet with a 5G chip. Now, all of this is commercially available. There's nothing special about this. What was special was that the patient didn't have to do a damn thing except monitor their blood pressure. Once they took the vital sign, it shuttled it all automatically to us. So we made it as easy as possible for them to acquire the necessary data. And since this was in the midst of the pandemic, the 5G chip-enabled tablet allowed them to do all their telemedicine visits with us, okay? So then all that data is shuttled safely through the Harman system to us, and it's then shuttled to a platform where we could easily access it. This is patient 1, Steve Zeiler. I was the first test patient, so that I could actually test this, and it was a wonderful system. And what we really liked about it is that every little vital sign had a little square. And since then, we've actually developed new squares. There's going to be a REMIC square, for example, that whatever data we get, it'll put it on this site. This test run was all about not the actual vital signs, but did the patients use it? And the primary outcome measure was, can you measure blood pressure 6 times per week for at least 2 weeks? And what we learned were several things. Number one, we had 60 patients. That was a fair bit, and we did it fairly quickly. 41 patients hit that mark. But interestingly, every single patient was enrolled in the inpatient stroke unit. They were trained how to do it. They agreed to do it. Only 41 patients ever did anything with it. The instant they left, they never did anything, okay? So 15 patients either sold it, threw it away, something. We never heard from them ever again. They didn't even come to see us and follow up. Of the 45 engagers, 91% hit that mark, right? So that's point number one. There's just and you guys all know this, I'm sure, right? There's just a cadre of people that are like, no, screw this, I'm not doing it. We also learned, not surprisingly, this is the video game effect, that even in the engagers, it falls off with time, right? We love Super Mario Brothers, but after 14 weeks, we don't like Super Mario Brothers as much anymore. The other thing that we learned was it was harder to get the physicians who needed to use the data than the patients. There are 13 stroke faculty, only 2 of them use the data. What the hell? Okay, physician, and we've learned this, that it's harder to get the physicians to do something than the patients. Patients get bored. But most of the patients could use this, right? So we said, great, we can actually monitor things that are important in stroke. But stroke is a neurologic disease. We have to be able to monitor things that are neurological. So how can we expand this? So let's look at stroke symptom monitoring. And we are working with ALS in addition to stroke, mainly because we can get funding through ALS. ALS is a disease of rich people, stroke is not. And we are monitoring, it's richer than stroke.
That's true.
Yeah. So we are developing a system where we can monitor voice, eye movements, and limb movements. So this is Kelly Norell. Before I joined the group, she is a PhD researcher who works for IBM. She has expertise in voice and voice monitoring. And the idea is, of course, if you have upper motor neuron degeneration, eventually your speech is going to get garbled. Clinicians know this. This is what happens in ALS. This is what happens in acute stroke. And before I joined this group, they were able to show, and this is a mark of ALS progression on the y-axis. Lower scores are worse clinically. And as this speech analysis showed more and more problems, more and more substitutions, it correlated with a very high degree with ALS progression, even non-speech progression. You see these very high R-squared scores here. And so we've actually taken this and developed an app through Answer ALS. Answer ALS is one of the major philanthropic funders. It's one of the major beneficiaries, for example, of the Ice Bucket Challenge, if you guys remember that, where patients can download this app from the App Store. They enroll online. They never actually have to talk to a single research coordinator. It's all done via an online system. And then they're given tasks. They're given tasks on a weekly basis to read these sentences to describe a scene, for example. It records it, it sends the data to IBM for analysis. We said, awesome, this is great. How can we expand this? We are incorporating eye movements as well. So this is the work of Ali Tehrani, Puya Bastani. They published these two papers using an adorable app, so named, that you see at the top of the screen, which I think is freaking brilliant, right? The EYE or iPhone. And for the non-clinicians in the room, this is optokinetic ribbon, that if you were to actually look at this, your eyes will just move automatically. And you can do a number of tests. This is one of them. And this is what happens to participants. Their eyes move. This is a normal undergraduate. His eyes move in response to the optokinetic tape. You can see the nystagmus, and this is recorded. This is then shuttled to the experts to perform an analysis. Okay, this is one of the examples. I had no hand in making this. The people that you see here on the right side of the screen did, and I absolutely have to give a huge shout out to David Dubentoker. He is the division director of the neurovestibular system who oversaw a lot of this. Okay, and so we took this app, and this was run mainly by Puya Bastani, who's trying to become a resident here. I think he's great. Are you on the committee? So we took this app and we took 10 patients in the ALS clinic and we handed them a phone. We could not help them. We could not give them any instruction other than what was on the app. And we said, go. And they went to a room, they turned it on, and they followed the instructions, and it freaking worked. They were able to record their eye movements. So on the top is what the iPhone recorded, and on the bottom is the gold standard. This is video oculography from glasses that are FDA cleared to perform this type of analysis. It's very similar. And in this study, we were able to show exactly what I write here, is that these ALS patients could, using this app independently, record eye movements that were as good as what video oculography could produce. Great. That's the whole point of this study, because what we then want to do is send this out into the universe, just like with the voice app, and begin to get data back. So then the last bit is from the godfather here, Dr. Remick. I love this. I don't know if you ever talk about this, but this I don't know if you guys know the history of open pose, right? I run an animal lab in addition to a human lab. And I had nothing to do with deep lab cut, but it comes from a lazy graduate student who didn't want to perform kinematic analyses and so figured out a way to use a computer to independently mark animal joints. These are not marked by anybody. These are marked by a computer. That's what OpenPose does. So OpenPose learned from deep lab cut, and we do it in the human. These are some of the initial studies that Ryan and his team showed that this was useful. I'm going to show you a great video. So this is me. I woke up in the morning one Saturday wearing my Voltron t-shirt, as you do on a Saturday morning. I performed this test. I sent it to Ryan, and within about 15 minutes, I get this bit back on the right side of the screen. Okay. Ryan hasn't done this by hand. This is all marked by a computer. And you see, for example, my hand here with each little dot marking a joint. And so if you know a joint and you know how it moves in space, you have kinematics. That's the point, okay? And I think you guys have seen this last week. It works. These are just the initial studies. So at this point, we have the ability to monitor voice. We have the ability to monitor eyeballs. We have almost the ability to monitor limbs. So as of 12:30 today, we have an app that can do exactly what Ryan does, but similar to what Ali Tehrani's eyeball app does. So we've been working with Antares to develop an app that will collect patient data. It's late. I'm not going to connect my iPhone to show you, but we basically have the ability to take a patient, take a participant, give them confirmation that their limbs are in view, and then they begin doing the task, and it records and it sends the data to Ryan. This can now happen. So the idea is to take these three markers of neurological function, voice, eye, and upper limb. We're working on a lower limb. That comes, and that's a bit dangerous for ALS patients as well. It's going to be all smooshed together by Antares, and that will then be the next step of cancer ALS monitoring, so that we monitor all three of these variables. We need to talk about this because this is how we have to do this next, right? Because this is also going to be used in our stroke patients. And what I want to show you guys is using these types of digital devices actually leads somewhere. It's not just about getting the data and going, my patient is doing worse, or hey, my patient is doing better. It's about designing something to intervene, and we have that. This is less about wearables and more about what we can actually do then with that data. And I show the three people that have helped devise this, right? We have an example of how we can take digital therapeutics and get people better based on what their deficits are. This is the trial that we ran, that we can actually show that it improves patient outcomes after stroke. And I've taken this digital therapeutic, which is Bandit the Dolphin, and put it into an enriched environment funded by the Sheikh Khalifa Stroke Institute, Mind Maze, in this almost one-off, high-end hotel-like room where you have one patient at a time that is led to the experience room and introduced to Bandit the Dolphin. The doors open, it's like a theater experience. They are guided through this experience by a therapist who understands this, where their arm that has a paucity of movements, that is hemiparetic, occupies the body of a dolphin that has beautiful movements. And their arm is encouraged to move through this space so that they perform an unbelievable number of minutes of time on task so that they can get better. But the goal here is to personalize these interventions so that we know exactly how to dial this in, okay? In other words, what we're doing now is I see them in the emergency department in the hospital. They go home, and 3 months later I see them, and then 3 months later I see them. We want a continuous stream of data so that we can personalize what we're doing here, and that's the goal, okay? And this doesn't stop at a clinic location. We now have not only Bandit the Dolphin, but we have Nono the axolotl, which is a digital therapeutic that they take home. They get this case, they get this support, and they do this at home. So it flows all the way from the acute situation through the hospital to home. The idea is exactly that, is that we can monitor these patients, get data from them so that we can direct their digital therapeutic interventions when they come and see us. So I'll stop there, give all the highlights to the people that need highlights and answer any questions.
You mentioned that physicians don't like the data that they get, they ignore it, which I know. How did they receive it? Can you make them receive data in a more digestible or insertable way that you can't ignore it, right? Like I ignore data that isn't easy.
Yeah. So one, as I'm sure anybody who's tried to do this understands, is that the keys to Johns Hopkins Epic are guarded very closely. In other words, there's absolutely no way that unless there's an act of God or landed king, that might be the same thing, that you could ever get data into Epic directly. So that's number one. Number two, though, to your point, we figured out a way by working with Harman that a clinician could easily get into the platform. We made logging into the platform the exact same as the JHEAD ID. So they didn't have to learn any new passwords or anything else, just have the JHEAD ID. And then it instantly spit it out in a format that would be copied and pasted directly into an Epic. And like it was already formatted for Epic, it looked beautiful in Epic. So all they would have to do is Command C, Command V, that's it. And that was apparently too much.
I'm wondering if your next step is a bridge, right? So as the AI technology comes into the space that we can do that, then it's
Sure.
done for you.
You still have to get them to log in though. That was, yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
And
okay.
Steve and I are actually putting in a grant in about a month where the aim one is going to be a qualitative study of clinicians to really distill down what they want and how they want it and how they want it delivered such that we're, actually doing something that people want to use versus being like, hey, there's this cool stuff, it's available, it's gonna be great.
And then it never.
But it sits there, yeah.
I don't know, Evan, if you guys both want to stand up there for questions?
I'm just glad that you guys are here. So
Yeah.
Evan, you probably figured out that Steve is the guy who I told you was interested in doing
Yes.
hand
Yeah.
stuff, and
Sorry, sure.
I should have,
Great.
I should have connected you guys before this, but
Have you talked to the Twister company for tomorrow?
Yeah, the game.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I'll just tell you, like, if anybody wants to be involved in any of these things, if anybody wants to refer patients, I'm open to any and all of that. And so I think you asked, so Antares, this is the company that's making the app. This is a rare situation. It's only fee for service. They want no IP in this whatsoever. And that was actually one of the requirements of Answer ALS, as opposed to everything ALS, is that Answer ALS is clear that it has to be open and no IP. Yeah.
there's so many different approaches to this.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, sure. No, it's okay.
oh, I was just saying, I mean, so like, I always think of Steve's stuff as like a data collection tool. You can get any raw video that you want, and we have certain things that we could analyze from it. But if it was something new that Steve wanted, we could make some new code to do, he showed finger tapping, we do a bunch of different hand stuff. And then Evans is like really, and UI UX all the way to like final analysis. And so there's just like so many ways to like get these things in. And one thing that we think probably arguably the most about is like clinical views versus in the wild use. Like who's using this? Is it Steve recording a video of his patient, or is it the patient recording a video of themselves? And I think those are like really different applications and how they're delivered. Because I can see where the patients might want the text, but at the same time, like a lot of the clinicians that actually do want like an app that they could just have on their phone all the time. And instead of, so for people who don't know me, I work in the rehab department, and there a lot of the clinicians are already, and you probably do this too, Steve, are already taking videos of their patients all the time. And then, it's kind of like are you better or worse than you were before? And so they're using the camera app on their phone to do that. And so just replacing that with some kind of like clinical computer vision assessment is kind of what we're working towards, so that they can actually track that longitudinally without having to be like, Better or worse, better or worse.
And it gives patients peace of mind.
Yeah.
To say that.
Yeah, we do
Sorry.
also work on the phone, but so that, because we had the exact same feedback. of,
Yeah.
You know, I want to be able to pull this up in my clinic, shoot a quick video, and then we've got a comparative splash that they can see two different assessments next to each other as well.
We're not
So
supposed to do that.
Record videos.
unless it's on an app where you can't.
Yeah,
You can't
exactly.
save it to your local
Right.
camera roll, but if it is on the HIPAA secure and SOC compliant, you can do
So
it.
I have a question about your system. You
Or you get
initially
HIPAA
showed that
file.
you had the little stickers. Is that still a part of the solution, or did you basically evolve into now it's just the video? Is that the case?
Yeah, no
Okay.
finish was necessary. The original video was there because it's the validation you have to do to be able to.
Okay, so the patient does not need to have the stickers on there?
No.
Okay.
Yes, various questions, but I'll focus on, just build on what folks have just recently said about the users that you chose. So obviously you're very clinician focused. Have you, as a consumer, I would be interested in both of these kinds of things to see how I progress over time, for instance. Is there, from a sharing with Epic perspective, is there a reason you prefer sending directly to clinician versus having the patient do it him or herself and then send that information over? Because they have to read that, right? You send it a message, right? Is that a choice you made?
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. In stroke, we want that to happen. In ALS, we don't want that to happen. Can you guess why?
No.
Stroke gets better, ALS gets worse.
Okay.
And what happens is that every week the ALS patient is reminded they're doing worse and they stop.
Right.
So that's why we've learned that in certain diseases, we want the patient to have less access to the data unless they specifically ask, because of course we'll share it,
Right,
but
right.
they're constantly reminded they're doing worse. We're stroke, we're like, look how good you are doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and I would imagine, having stroke sufferers in my own family, having that feedback in those first few
Great.
months that's incredibly useful.
Yeah.
You get discouraged so quickly. So having that feedback, visual feedback, okay, so my voice got better in 2 months. I see a lot of potential with the consumer himself using this.
That's like one thing that hasn't been done at all is, this stuff all lends itself so clearly to like tracking motor function over time, but that's a great point that you made, that nobody has really looked at like the value of providing this feedback on things like mood and mental health as people are recovering from stroke.
Right, like even those, what you have, just the data you have on your voice getting better, your movement getting better.
Yeah.
That alone can be incredibly encouraging to a
As
patient.
a person who takes care of people who do get worse, though, it's very hard to show people that they get worse, but sometimes they don't appreciate, since their background is getting worse, that some interventions have made them better.
Yeah, right.
So like, I feel like there are medications we give, we treat their depression or we treat their spasticity or all these things. And they're like, I don't think it's really helping. And you're like, well, let's go back and see where you were before. And if you had some way of having quantified, like, oh, actually your gait improved, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it would be helpful for you too, as a clinician, your ability to recall for that one person, like what was the point of that intervention 2 years ago? Be good. Might help to like lead to, ongoing continuity of access to those medications, especially as they're expensive. Companies don't want to pay for it or whatever. Be like, you showed that they actually stopped declining once you started this treatment, so.
Totally agree. It's the best part about being a stroke doctor.
Yeah.
And I get to take credit for them getting better.
Don't be messing with my
One of
people.
the biggest challenges of that though is to make it available to the end customer, to the patient. What are the challenges to doing that? The regulatory ones you have to go through. What's
Talking about the data or the actual
Yeah, no, like,
intervention?
for example, I think it's a great example of like, but actually you're having these treatments have done better, and so just from a point of view, to continue the medication, so justify that because from your perspective. What are the barriers to doing that now? Why isn't?
They're not doing continuous data monitoring
Yeah.
except through like the wearables, and that just started, or the, not all wearables, like wrist-worn, accelerometers right now. So, and they're not being tagged as like, and here's where you started this medicine, like they're not being annotated. They're only in research. So like linking it up with the clinical record and changes, therapeutics, I think is still in its infancy.
Very much. But
But then you sound like the challenge of like, back to God, get data back in Epic. So
Well,
even if you did have all
That's
this
a whole
data,
other issue.
getting it back in,
well, and I'm sorry, let me clarify. There's a difference between the data auto-populating Epic.
Yeah.
That almost never happens.
especially on all the raw data, you want it to be.
Or, no, even let's say that Ryan has an output that is like a very simple 3-sentence output. To auto-populate Epic the way that, say, a radiology report would do it, almost impossible, not gonna happen. Alternatively, if he sends me the data and as the clinician, I look at it and say, this is important, and I put it in Epic, that's easy to do.
Right.
But then you just have to convince the physician to what Ryan's talking about, you just have to convince the physician to do it.
Maybe the intake desk or like them, ultimately
Right.
like the, folks who take vital signs or whatever, get like a.
Right.
Some kind of way to
A
access.
human has to like
No,
bless
I
it.
know, it's so painful.
I think there's a very interesting, incentive leads to action here. And, we talk a lot about what are the metrics that matter the most and are reimbursed as well. And so there is a whole nother level to this of which of these endpoints are actually reimbursed, are clinicians paid to look at and go through, and then are they logging that in Epic to make that happen? And there's only a very small number of those that are actually reimbursed. And so there's a whole other level of architecture beyond this to enable it beyond just the technical limitations.
So
Physician activity needs to take place on with the instances of care, so they can bill for it.
So I'll share that we now have a billing situation for this, and we also have a billing situation for a system I didn't talk about, the Mind Motion Go. I actually went through the American Medical Association to create a CPT code. That was a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah,
I'm happy to work with them.
because it's, right, otherwise there's lack of incentive
Yeah.
for people to do, because you're putting time in something that you're not gonna get credit for, right?
So Evan, I have a question about your business model of how this would work.
Yeah, that's, it's part of the reason I was
Is it
initially.
still in evolution? I mean, you're still working on it, you have a pretty good idea.
Yeah, we've got a decent enough idea and enough to move forward with. The part of the reason additionally for choosing the computer vision solution versus the wearable devices was lacking the reimbursement codes. If you do it less than 16 days, you can't do RPM, RTM, not accessible to us for the spinal assessment codes. And so the wearable device would have been an out-of-pocket expense for a lot of this, which is going to be higher than really just because the cost of the device. But right now, we've got two different models: the direct sale SaaS subscription to providers, reducing their documentation time, being able to have that better patient communication and engagement, and then track those assessments as well, use it for research, is what we're selling it for. And then additionally, we've got a couple of medical device companies who want to use our system. We've got a medical device company out of California that was our first contract that we're going to launch next year, which is they have a rehabilitative knee brace after total knee replacement. They're going to have to hire a doctor to come in, do range of motion tests, gait tests, like 6 times over the course of their study, because they're doing a clinical trial to show that their device is able to improve function of the patient over a long time. And so being able to then have that automated and collect that enabled them to save a lot of money in the study. And so how do we help and work with existing device companies to be able to prove and validate out their clinical trials? So clinical trial market is our strongest initial go to market. And then we're working on some of these coding work. I'd love to pick your brain on that too, to be able to get coding expansion on a number of the gait assessment, things like that.
So what the device is, what is the device? So but it was you got rid of the little sensors, so you don't need those. What is the actual physical form factor of the device? Just okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's you brought it off the phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. No app, just the clinicians can schedule how often they want assessments and PROMs. So whether it be gait, range of motion, whatever the assessments that we have available that they're utilizing in their assessment, they set up how often the patient wants they want to assess. And then when they log in, they see an aggregated result of how they've trended over time in their clinic appointment, as was mentioned earlier. That's the billable event for them to be able to see that.
Can I ask, what's a PROM?
Patient reported outcome measure. It's just,
Ah,
the,
I had to look it up too. I
Yeah.
heard of e-pro and pro, but never
Yeah,
prom.
Yeah.
I thought it was like
No,
something
it's been a long time
professional
since I've been in high
regulations.
school,
so no, I mean, so like Oshkosh, like the ODI score, Promise score, are big ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Coos score is big for knee. And then what was the one you mentioned?
ALS, FRS, and road score.
Exactly. And so part of our application where I said it works like a Google form is you can design and put in whatever assessment you want and then aggregate those results and calculate those. Or if you're testing a new one, you can do that as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Asking from a process standpoint or business model, so I'm a rheumatologist, but I have a joint appointment in neurology, so I play one on TV. So I study and research and I'm a clinician for myositis. So we stole your ALS FRS and made it the IBM FRS. So I'm seeing a lot of potential applicability. I guess my question is either from a process standpoint, from a business standpoint, I see potential here. Does it make sense to go wide and try different and can we see if we can, not so much voice and eye, but limb for sure, or wearables, not necessarily for spine, but certainly for, I've thought a lot about how we can do physical therapy remotely. Every patient's a little different. Does it make sense to think about those now? Yes? Or is that, I don't know if that's too diffuse, then you get distracted.
I mean, really, I don't know much about ALS, but I know upper motor neurons and I know stroke, right? And the reason we went to ALS is because that's where the funding is.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question is yes, especially if we want to show that it works.
I think one of the things that for my product Wearable Labs, more about generically being able to collect data from any type of device, not just wearable, but also connected, is that you have to kind of go to market. You have to kind of be tied to a department or a disease.
That's what I was wondering.
And that tends to be much easier for you to go ahead and be successful for selling it and going to the market, and you get the funding, different things like that. And then once you once you kind of proven out one, then you have
Right.
other ways. So that's where that kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think you have to have a focus going in because if you have a new product or something like this, you can't sell a wide,
That's my
thing
question.
like that. You want to go to the Department of Neurology for this thing, or
But do you, while you do that, and you're focused from a business standpoint, definitely you're
Mhm.
channeling it in one place, does it also make sense, or if it's possible, obviously it's money and time, should you be researching adjacent diseases? Because then, once you have one, then you're ready for your next one to go in, rather than waiting to get approval, then going,
Like Evan's,
division.
Evan's focusing on walking because you can start by selling walking to neurology department or something, but there's gonna be orthopedic surgeons want to measure walking, pediatricians want to measure
Neurologists, yeah.
walking, yeah.
Rheumatology.
So I think that's the kind of, that's stuff that we've been working on, like Steve and I do upper limb like he showed, and then we use that a lot. A lot of that overlap with stroke occurs with like Parkinson's disease, for example, where you want to measure finger tapping, hand opening, close, all these repetitive movements.
Yeah.
So finding stuff like that, that's like specific, but also generalizable, I think is kind of what, I'm not trying to start a bit, but like Evan's stuff is similar in that it's got
I
broad
think like
Steve's too.
I kind of see Fitbit as the first device we're supporting, and there's some initial targeted focus like in rehab. But I think that almost going forward from the research side, almost every study that has some sort of unique data they want to collect remotely with some sort of device or worn or not, or connected or something, they're almost some sort of activity tracker is going to be like a baseline. They're all going to want to have that first. So there's a generalizable aspect there that they kind of want to get that. They get that automatically, no matter what else they're collecting, because it's generally useful.
Yeah.
So I'll share with you some of the largest drug trials in neurology in ALS. I don't know if you guys know that. You look at some of the drugs that are brought to market or tried to bring to market, it's in ALS patients. And the companies that run these trials want these apps.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have to wait for Jeff Rothstein to bring the patient back to clinic every 6
Correct.
months. They want to know what's happening on a week by day basis. So one of the things is these drug companies, these huge pharma companies are really interested in these biomarkers.
And they want to know, are you actually, like, they don't want to know anymore, oh, you used to be a 2, now you're a 1. It's like, give me real data. like,
Exactly.
On walking speed or
Right.
whatever it
Exactly.
might be.
What does your day look like? What can you do?
Yeah, not
Patient.
some objective or, subjective, I should say, scale.
One thing that might be helpful as you're kind of evaluating this, our study that we ran just informally was showing them the mix of the 100 different assessments and measures and everything that we're developing on that and seeing what would actually make a clinical difference. Because in the end, you're going to have to prove clinical value some way. And so if you can design a million different systems, use a million different devices, collect all of this data, but it probably isn't relevant. And then you also start to build too big of a study, which was kind of our first mistake. And then it takes forever to get done and analyzed. And then you have to deploy, you have to integrate all the systems together. So my advice on that would be figure out what metrics are most important to you. And then figure out of the technology landscape, what is the easiest way to collect those, and then go after a small subset of those that you've got the highest potential initial results on, because they'll probably run a pilot and then you can write a grant and something bigger on that afterward, just with a normal granting process, right? Play that game, get something that is pretty concrete that you can measure now and then go forward. And then it would also provide kind of a different lens on this for a company's standpoint. Granting agencies and stuff, you want to be able to jump around and go to different, and then go where the money is. We're raising around right now. We're very close to. We've been successful in it so far, and the story that investors want to see is very different than a granting agency.
Yeah.
If you say we're going after all of these different, they will. That's an instant turn off for them. And so having your core initial market, or else they're going to think you're distracted, that you're going after, that you've shown some traction and progress on. But then how we do it is then we tease, we are a platform. And like the future intent of us is to integrate in, because I think we can win with deployment and getting this out into consumers' hands way easier. And so being able to show that the tech stack is a platform that we can scale to other indications eventually, but they want to see what is your roadmap to success in one indication that will pay you. And then they're fine with everything else beyond that. But you have to walk that line very carefully.
On that front, like, can you walk through how you decided on spinal surgery as the problem to solve?
Yeah.
Did you do like sort of a market analysis? Did you look at what clinicians, were telling you was most important to them? What was your decision process there?
We did a full analysis. We had, 200 or so different needs that we found in orthopedic and knee, hip, spine. And as a team, we narrowed this down using the biodesign process to be able to figure that out, stepwise. So I talked about, 3 iterations of this same product, but doing the full cycle and then running until you fail. Hopefully you fail fast on those different ones to figure out where you go. But yeah, also what I said there is our first market technically isn't spine, it's clinical trials and facilitation of research, because that's who's willing to sign contracts with us now to do research, to collect this data, and then it's a sellable product. And then the second market is spine and showing after those pilots and the willingness to pay with beyond it. So it is, you traverse through and then you try to figure out through some kind of a analysis of your different options on the table, which is the strongest, fastest market, best business model, most engaged clinicians, and then the biggest potential value to, patients and providers.
I know, Virginia, you're a Bloomberg, right?
Yes.
So just from a future presentation point of view, well, they have, we are talking software and hardware, different things. What we want to cover for Wearables Hopkins is not just about devices and connected things. What happens after you get the data? What are some interesting things? So you mentioned there's some other people who are really interested, but very interesting for a lot of researchers to go, I want to collect this data, but then what do I do with it? How do I, because you can get a lot of data. And one participant with Fitbit, usually what we collect 1 week, one for collecting. We're not even getting sleep yet. It's 75,000 records. And so you have to come in with a hypothesis, I think, of what you want to do with this versus saying we're gonna get the data, all this data, then we're gonna find our hypothesis.
Sure.
So I think that perspective and what you guys are doing is really interesting. So anyone you or others, you could talk about some of those challenges. And many others are having, same one.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So
Yeah, actually, do you work with Michelle Carlson on, she uses Bandit for something?
Michelle Carlson. no.
Okay, well, yeah, because she just signed on as my thesis advisor, so this is really interesting, the application here
I know Michelle well.
as well. Fantastic.
I've been with Bandit since day one. I worked with John Krakauer to develop Bandit. It's great to see it. Deployment. I'm gonna have to leave.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we could probably start wrapping up. Also, another thing that we want to do with the wearables at Hopkins is if you're looking to, you have skills and you want to help out other researchers, looking for work or other things to do. But also we have students who may want to learn and volunteer, work on research if you have that. I want to be able to bring this to the table. So Anil-san, I'm sorry, I forget your name. Is it
Keisha.
Keisha? He's willing to help you guys out, do anything, including wash your car, mow your lawn.
Thank you.
Just, I work,
Just over tax.
sorry.
No.
Are you running on?
No, I'm good.